And when we arrived in Azorestan, at this place, where this monument has been made, the princes and grandees and nobles and householders and satraps and accountants and storekeepers and the remaining Persians and Parthians who were in Azorestan, Nod Shiragan, Garamea, and Siarazur, all together they came to Hayani Nikatra to meet us. And here they came into our presence where this monument has been made. These are the words of Narseh, emperor of the Sasanian Empire, who had the inscription in Paikuli built. Who was Narseh? Narseh was one of the sons of Shabur I, and he was one of the three sons that Shabur had mentioned in his own inscription at Nakhchirostam, saying that they would be fit for the throne. Narseh was called in Shabur's inscription Khosrow Narseh, and he was let's say, the Aryan and the Mazda worshipping Narseh, king from Hind, Sagestan, and Turan up to the shores of the sea. In a second list, containing offerings for the soul of the different members of the family, where all important members of the family, of the Sasanian family, were mentioned. He was once again mentioned, this time after Bahram and Ormezd Ardashir. Bahram, the king of Gilan, and Ormezd Ardashir, the great king of the Armenians. And once again, Narseh was called king of the Sakas. When we turn to his own inscription in Paikuli, we read that Narseh calls himself, defines himself, I am the Mazdian Majesty Narseh, king of Iran and Aneran, whose origin is from the gods, son of the Mazdian Majesty Shabur, king of kings of Iran and Aneran, whose origin is from the gods, grandson of the Majesty Ardashir, king of kings. And he says of himself that he was earlier the king of Armenia, and that he moved south from Armenia because Vahanam, son of Tatrus, have attached the diadem to the head of Vaharam, king of the Sakas, that is to the head of Varam III, who was the son of Vaharam II. And in his inscription at Paikuli, Narseh underlines how his own values matched with the values of the Zoroastrian and Mazdian religion. He says that Vahanam, son of Tatrus, through his own falsehood and with the help of Ahriman and the devils, placed the diadem on the head of Vaharam, king of Sakas. And he did not inform us, that is probably the older member of the Sasanian family, about the matter. And as for the glory, Huarra, and the realm, and his own throne and honor, which his ancestors received from the God, may he take them back from the evildoers against gods and men, and may he keep the Iranian kingdom, Iran-Shah, safe till the last. And these are the words that the nobles write to Narseh to encourage him to challenge Vaharam III for the throne. And we commanded that, here speaks Narseh, who to that liar, using the term druzan, which is a very specific Mazdian word, who was first against the gods and ourselves, and secondly against Iran-Shah and the whole realm, him first we shall punish. It is fitting, here again, the nobles are speaking, it is fitting for your majesty that you should ascend the throne which the gods gave you, and that you should be, something, we have a lacuna here, and should keep and govern the realm until the renovation. Frashgird, once again, a very specific Zoroastrian term. And be happy by your own glory, Huarra, and realm. And the other part of Narseh's claim to the throne was that he, as Rahim Shayagan, our host here tonight, rightly emphasized, are the deep roots of his family, his fathers and his ancestors. And then, here again, we graciously admitted them. Then the messengers from the princes and the archbed and the grandees and the nobles came to us, saying that, may the King of Kings graciously move from Armenia hither to Iranshar. And as for the glory and the realm and his own throne and honor, which his ancestors, Niagan, received from the gods, may he take them back from the evildoers against gods and men. And that the throne of your father and ancestors, again, Pidarud Niagan, which you in unfitting manner have sat upon. Therefore, and this is Narseh speaking to his contester, therefore do now ascend your throne and receive the honor of your father, this again are the nobles and ancestors, Pidar Udniagan, and so on and so forth. So it is deep in this inscription the idea that Narseh is going back to the deepest roots of the Sasanian dynasty, to his father Shabur, to Ardashir, to those who came before them. And in this, those who came before them, there probably was an idea about this Bayan, this Bagan, whose monuments were seen in the area of Marvdasht, and who linked Narseh himself and his dynasty to the dynasty of the Achaemenians. Now, this is the challenge that moved me and my team to go to Paikuli at first. I mean, we wanted to work both from an archaeological and from an epigraphical and from an historical point of view on this very important monument, being the only monument specifically built by a king to host an inscription. And we went to Slemani in Iraqi Kurdistan, where after some discussion, it was immediately after the Gulf War, so I mean, Kurdistan was building itself in that period. We went to the site of Paikuli and to the valley around Paikuli. Where is this? This is in the northeastern part of Iraq, not far from the border of Iran, and near the city of Darbandikhan. In late antiquity, this area was very central because it was at the crossroads of different important roads of communications going from the lowlands of Mesopotamia to the highlands of Media, Azerbaijan, and further on to Fars and Khorasan. Now it is an isolated context in the middle of nowhere, on top of a stony hill from which one can gaze in the far at the valley of at the Diyala Valley, and even further on to the outskirts of the Zagros Mountains. What we saw when we reached the site was a small monument. The only thing still standing was the inner conglomerate. The outer blocks were laying about on a very wide area, and they had been moved many times in history. So what we did is go back to travel reports to the persons and the scholars who had been there before us. First of all, Sir Henry Rawlinson, the renowned Englishman who traveled to the Middle East, to Iraq and Iran. He lived between 1810 and 1895, and he left us the first handwritten copies of some of the blocks in Paikuli. What is interesting is that a few of these copies are the only evidence for now lost blocks. The main archaeologist who worked in Paikuli before us was Ernst Herzfeld. Ernst Herzfeld lived between 1879 and 1948. He was probably the greater archaeologist of his time, although his personality has been sometimes discussed. But he also was a man who had skills in the field of epigraphy. I mean, his work on the inscription constitutes the base, the foundation of all what comes later. And Ernst Herzfeld reconstructed a tower not dissimilar from the Kaaba Zardosht, although with some peculiar characteristic. He thought that at least four of the busts that we will see later were standing one on each wall above the inscription, which he thought was written, at least in his published papers, because we have a different picture when we look at his unpublished papers, on two opposing walls. Herzfeld traveled to Paikuli thrice. He never spent a long period, so he was only able to document what emerged and not what was still in the underground. Although, as we will see, underground is a big word for Paikuli. At the end of the 70s and in the beginning of the 80s, two great scholars of our great linguists and philologists, Helmut Humbach, who is well known for his edition of the Gathas and of the Western text, and Proz. Dr. Schervo, one of the most gifted Iranists of our time, did a very important edition of the Sasanian inscription of Paikuli. Also, being linguists and not archaeologists, they did not feel the need to go back to the site. So they worked essentially on Herzfeld's materials, which was enlarged by some photographs and, as a matter of fact, some new blocks that had been reported by Volker Pott. In its turn, and more or less in the same days, this new reading of Paikuli's inscription provided food for the thought of historians, such as Erich Kettenhofen, who wrote an important work mainly on Armenian history, entitled Tirdad und die Inschrift von Paikuli, Tirdad and the inscription from Paikuli, in which he used the fact that the name of Tirdad was mentioned in Paikuli to explain some to that moment obscure aspects of Armenian history. Now, this monument is not, as I said, in the middle of nowhere. Near the monument we have monuments of late Achaemenian or probably early Hellenistic period, such as the Kizkapan tomb. We have the two important reliefs from Pire Magrun showing kings, probably local kings, dating from the Assassid period. We have the whole pilgrimage complex, if indeed it is a pilgrimage complex on Mount Pire Magrun, where these two bas-reliefs are found. And we have on the other end of the Karadag range the small palace of Bazian, maybe a fire temple, maybe a palace, that was certainly reused as a church since crosses, both on plaster and one bronze cross in Greek have been found on the site. Not far from from Paikuli in Darbandi Khan, there are also the remains of a Sasanian bridge and of a small palace that may date to that period. So, what are our research lines? Of course, the first one has to do with the physical aspects of the monuments. We worked at recovering and documenting all the blocks belonging to the monument, adding all information available from earlier studies, Rawlinson, Herzfeld, and so on. Then, a very central part, and of course my personal main interest, is the study of the inscription, both in its material form, that is paleography, techniques, styles, and of course the new edition of the text that is now necessary because we have rediscovered a very large number of previously unknown blocks. But of course the monument needs to be studied in its context, that is in its closer context, including what is found around it, what is found in the valley south of the Karadag, and in the larger context, I mean, its meaning, why did Narseh build the monument where he built it? And in the end, all this, I mean, this works leads to the reconstruction of the historical picture of the early Sasanian Empire. What we know is that this is the only example, as I said, of a monument built by a Sasanian king to carry an inscription. So something that has parallels farther west in the Roman Empire. It is a monument that may never have been completed. We do not know, at this stage at least, whether the monument consisted only of the tower, whether it had some other buildings around, or else, I mean, whether it resembled and to what extent it resembled places such as the Kaaba at Nakhsherostam or the parallel monument in Pasargade. So this is one of the research lines, of course. And of course, it is a monument that strongly stresses Narseh's continuity with his father and ancestors, which also means it stresses it in the sense that it also stresses the discontinuity with the reigns of the three Vaharams that preceded him. What did we find? First of all, we turned to the blocks documented by Herzfeld, and we saw that between Herzfeld's documentations and our documentation in 2008, our documentation that began in 2008, we saw that the blocks were much more varied, sometimes fragmentary, sometimes only fragments remained. Sometimes the writing was not easily readable. So what we did in 2009 is carry out a complete 3D documentation of the Slemani Museum, of the collection now at the Slemani Museums, in order, so to say, to freeze the decay of the blocks to a specific point. Then we sort of edited and published in 2014 the new blocks that we had discovered, and produced a mapping of the two walls, showing what we have, what is known through Herzfeld or Rawlinson, or even published by Dr. Sherkvo between later than his own edition. So all that is known, and what we physically have at the museum, and another mapping of the walls showing the new blocks that have been discovered and are quite numerous. And of course, this includes what was published in 2014 and not what we're going to publish in the final report that we hope to be completing in less than 24 months. Some of the blocks inscribed still stand and are very readable. Some are not. What we also did is systematically gather all architectonic elements that could say something about the monument. So we found bases, merlons, elements that stood under the merlons, and so on. In 2013, a specific documentation campaign was dedicated to the 5 busts of Narseh, one of which in the round and the other 4 in a very detailed high relief. So we documented these pieces in 3D. We were able to find some details that had already been noticed by Herzfeld, such as the palmette crown that very closely resembles the one found on the thrones, but that had not been documented in 3D before, showing the detail of precision of these documents, which also means the skill of the person who worked on this monument. And Luca Colliva and Gianfilippo Terribili in 2017 dedicated a specific article to what they call a forgotten Sasanian sculptures, the 5th bust of Narseh from the monument of Paikuli. And this bust is extremely interesting because it is in the all-round. It is extremely detailed. It may have resembled, not exactly an erma, because some elements of the erma were lacking, but a bust on a pedestal. Some details of this statue had fallen and were found around the monument. But what is important is that Narseh's 5th bust is stylistically very similar to the statue of Shabour I. That is one of the few statues in stone at Bishapur Cave. And we have some pictures showing this, but it is also probably similar to Absais, or to the setting, or it was set in a setting similar to the one of Absais' bilingual inscription found in Bishapur, and to the side of the statue described in Absais' bilingual inscription found in Bishapur, and carrying an effigy of King Shabour I, Narseh's father. In 2018, when I came back from my stay in Iran, we restarted heavily field campaigns in Paikuli itself. So we found a set of new blocks, which were documented and inserted in an aerial topography that had been carried out by my colleague Alessandro Iaia and his team, and here we have some examples of this. So what happened is that in 2018 we found 7 new Middle Persian blocks, together with 3, up to now, let's say 7 blocks that we identified, and 3 yet unidentified blocks and a few fragments. For the Parthian version, we have 2 new blocks, one of which is common to the 2 inscriptions, and we will see why this is so important, and 7 new unidentified blocks together with a few fragments. This adds to 4 unidentified Parthian blocks that have been found in earlier campaigns, blocks that are quite ruined, and we are trying to read through innovative technologies. In 2019, we carried out a wider topography of the area through flights by a drone, and we came to identify to newly identified more than 500 blocks, including different forms, merlons, half columns, lunettes, inscribed fragments, inscribed blocks, and so on. And here you have some of the examples. In 2019, we also resumed excavation activities by doing a stratigraphic trench, which is TT3, TT1 and 2 were excavated at the end of the year 10s. And this new trench seems to support the idea that the hill had been leveled before building, had been artificially leveled before building the complex. In 2019, we also discovered 3 inscribed blocks, 2 in Middle Persian, 3 further inscribed blocks, 2 in Middle Persian, 1 in Parthians. On 4 blocks, we identified possible mason marks and a few more fragments. So that now, let's say we have about 151, we know about 150, 160 inscribed blocks, and we have documented a total of 700 blocks. This is what we are doing now in terms of topography. One of the blocks that was extremely important, I mean, some of the blocks carry information that are important for the interpretation of the inscription, and not only for the understanding of how far the Sasanian dynasty developed a culture of inscriptions, such as could be seen in other regions of Western Asia. In 2009, we had already noticed that one of the column bases carried letters written on it. So we could determine that there was some irregularity in the layout of the inscription. As a matter of fact, on block F1, the irregularity took place at the beginning. Further on, with this new finds, we saw that this happened also on not on the basis, but higher up in the monument. And in the end, we discovered a block called F1 for the Middle Persian area and F17 for the Parthian area that shows that the 2 inscribed walls were next to one another and not opposite one to the other as previously thought. In the trilingual inscription of Shabur, Middle Persian is on the eastern wall, Parthian on the western. So it is different. I mean, of course, we have also Greek, so some of the inscriptions are on adjacent walls. So what is important is that this semi-column that we named PB 352 has a double inscription on 2 sides, giving us this new information. It was discovered in 2018, so it is one of the new findings. Once we had this further understanding, we turned to the idea to looking around in the area, and as a matter of fact, Emanuela Borgia, a Roman archaeologist, an archaeologist of the Roman province, specializing on the Roman provinces and active mainly in Anatolia, joined our team. And we started looking around for possible models of Narseh's tower. Of course, one was the Kaaba of Zardoz, as we shall see, but other similar monuments are, for example, the tomb towers in Palmyra, though quite earlier. I mean, they date from the 1st or 2nd century of our era. Other models could be the Tower of Nurabad, in fact, much smaller, the Kaaba Zardoz, or still other monuments in Opera Quadrata. Do we know something more about the monument? Yes, we do. We know the name of this monument, which is extremely important also from the point of view of the history of religions related to the Sasanian period. Because in 2 blocks that we discovered, the monument that is in the Parthian blocks, already published in 2014, and in the new Middle Persian blocks discovered in 2018, we have seen the name of this monument. It's called Pilag N, Peroz Anahid Narseh. This is the monument of Peroz Anahid Narseh. Now, and of course it goes on saying, and we made this monument before. What is a pilag? Pilag is a word used in Middle Persian to indicate different things. It is used to indicate the monument in the Paikuli inscription, and one of the young members, one of our students, has developed a very interesting idea linking this name with the Near Eastern tradition. It is, of course, a word known in Manichaean text, where it is used both as the name of an altar for idols or a plinth carrying images of divinities, and in one fragment of a Manichaean parable in Parthian, it is used to describe the platform where the sovereign sits while receiving dignitaries. So we have an interesting context which may or may not be related to New Persian pelle, in the sense of steps of stairs or so on. The name of this pilag, of this monument, Peroz Anahid Narseh, is of course a compound, and in my opinion it can be compared with Vaharam's well-known epithet of Kurdish inscriptions, Bokhturuvan Vaharam, and for which I still agree with Mackenzie against Grenet, Mackenzie 1989 against Grenet 1990. And my interpretation of this name is more or less Narseh with a victorious Anahid, that is, Narseh victorious by the grace of Anahid, which was the name of the monument, but tells us a lot about the beliefs of the sovereign. Of course, we know of 3 member compounds in Sasanian imperial administration. We have a number of them on Sasanian glyptics and so on, but this is not the place to dwell further on this subject. What I am interested in showing here is the degree of Narseh's devotion toward Anahita. And Anahita was, or Anahid, Nahid in New Persian, was, of course, the divinity in whose temple served the ancestors of Narseh, the ancestors of the Sasanian dynasty. Narseh is crowned by Anahita at Nakhsirustam. I have no doubt on the identification of the female image, the female character in his bas-relief with Anahita. In my opinion, it cannot be Shabur Durtag. We have other pictures of Anahita at Takht-e Bustan at a much later period, and we know of the importance of Anahita's cult in the entire Middle East from the, let's say, from the Achaemenian period throughout the Hellenistic, and then Hellenistic and Parthian, and then finally Sasanian period. So let's say Narseh was certainly a Zoroastrian, a Mazdian, maybe one of the most Mazdians in his family, as his own title says, but he was also a devotee of Anahit the Lady. And as he says in his Paikuli inscriptions, and when we saw that letter, then in the name of Ormazd and all the gods and Anahit the Lady, we moved from Armenia toward Iran-Shar. Of course, this Anahit the Lady is none other than the Anahit that was worshipped in Stakhr, as we know, from Kerdir's inscriptions. And he, that is Bahram II, made me, that is Kerdir, Mobed and judge of the whole empire, and he made me director and authority over the fire of Anahit Ardashir and had Anahit the Lady in Stakhr. And he named me Kerdir, sole saver of Bahram, Mobed of Ormezd. So again, we go back to the temple of Anahit the Lady of Anahit Banug in Stakhr. And we know that according to Tabari and other sources, the Sasanian family administered the cult of Anahit in Persis, where the cult was centered in Stakhr, not far from the Achaemenian seat of Persepolis. There, Anahita, or Anahid and Nahid, was worshipped in her aspect of a war goddess, as she had been at Pasargada in the Achaemenid period. Around the end of the 2nd century of the current era, the temple of Anahita at Stakhr was in the custodianship of Sasan. That is what Tabari tells us, who was also a hunter and an intrepid warrior. His son, Babak, still in Tabari's version, who killed the king of Stakhr and seized the throne, most probably continued to administer the goddess's temple. And this is what Mary Boyce tells us. The last king of the dynasty, Yazdegir III, was allegedly brought up at Stakhr, sort of closing a circle. In Achaemenian times, we know that Anahid, that the name of Anahid is found on 3 inscriptions by Artaxerxes II, 2 in Susa and 1 in Hamadan, and it is always found together with the names of Ahura Mazda and Mitra. So it is Ahura Mazda, Anahita, and Mitra. Berossos states that this king, Artaxerxes, was the first to set up statues of Aphrodite Anaitas at Babylon, Susa, Ecbatana, Persepolis, Bactra, Damascus, and Sardis, suggesting that these communities should worship the great deity. We know that Anahita's cult was quite common, had many followers in Anatolia. But what is more important for us is that Anahita was also an important divinity in Armenia, which of course is in a way in eastern Anatolia and the Caucasus, and that the Armenians, according to Strabo, shared in the religion of the Persians and the Medes, again I'm quoting Boyce, and particularly honored Anaitas. From the 1st century AD onward, a temple of this goddess at Eriza in Akilisene enjoyed great fame. An unverifiable tradition inscribed its foundation to Tigranes the Great, according to Moses of Koren. This holy place was considered to be the wealthiest and most venerable in Armenia, as Mary Boyce tells us. And again, when we look at Agatangelos, we know that in the first year of the reign of Tirdad in Greater Armenia, they went to the province of Akilisene, to the village of Erez, to the temple of Anahit, in order to sacrifice there. We are talking about the king and his followers. And the king ordered Gregory to worship Anahita and to send to Anahita's statue offerings of crowns and branches of trees. But Gregory did not agree to serve worship of the gods. And in response to this, as Agatangelos tells us, Gregory was put in jail and was sent away by the king, who only later repented and conversion. So, what does this mean for Narseh, for his idea, for his own beliefs? Well, Narseh, in my opinion, on the one hand, Narseh's devotion to Anahit was most probably another sign of continuity with his own ancestors. But this was not the only thing. This deity was popular in Armenian and Anatolia, in an area where she was variously identified, among others, with Artemis. And this, of course, may have strengthened Narseh's devotion. I mean, Narseh, either politically or by belief, Narseh was the king in Armenia, and his troops, or many of his troops, came from this area. So he may have seen a political interest in underlying his belief in Anahit, or else he may have been sincere in his belief on Anahit. And of course, these two aspects are very important. So what I have tried to show in this part of my talk is that the monument needed to be studied from an archaeological point of view. It needs now to be studied and integrated from a philological point of view. And finally, it can give us information on the material evenemential history of the Sasanian dynasty. But it also may tell us much about religious history and beliefs of the sovereign that ordered it made. Finally, I believe that when you work with cultural heritage, it is not only the scientific part one should look at, but also the part that aims at showing, at displaying your find in a museum. That is the part that concerns communication to a wider public, which is all the more important in a place like Iraqi Kurdistan, which needs to rebuild its identity on new grounds after the end of the Saddam regime. So we put a great effort in 2019 to start displaying the collection. And we build, thanks to the efforts of the entire team, a new Paikuli Gallery, the first one of two, displaying the entire collection, at least the entire collection that we have recovered until now. In 2021, in the next weeks, my team will again be leaving for Iraq, and if COVID leaves us alone for a short period, and with the help of God, we hope to be able to finish our exhibition, building a second gallery for the bus. But what we have now is standing in the Paikuli Museum is a new Paikuli Gallery displaying the blocks and trying to give an idea of how majestic this monument was, of how impressive this inscription was. Inscription that has been built also with optical means to be easier to to read. And these are images of these new rooms and its details. And especially, I'm very glad that in the opening day, which was the last time, now almost 2 years ago, that we were able to visit Iraqi Kurdistan, a huge number of public came and saw this exhibition. Once more and finally, as with all, or with many scientific enterprise, this is not the work of only one person. It is not only me. It is not only me and the closer of my assistants. It is a team built of persons from the Kurdish side, from the Slemani Museum, from the Slemani and Garmian Antiquities departments. It is students from Sapienza-University. It is specialists from different areas of our knowledge that came together and worked in a very extremely difficult setting. We ran away from Paikuli because of the war in the early years. We could not travel to Paikuli because of the pandemics now. The setting is extremely harsh outside any city, far from any city. But this team of persons, with our Kurdish colleagues, with Kak Kamal, with Kak Hashem, with Kak Shkur from Garmian, whose death we very much regret, was able to revive a monument, to study a monument, and to give it back to the community of the Kurds and the Iraqis of Suleimania, and open to the visit of anyone interested in Iranian and Sasanian history, and I am very proud of this. Finally, I wish to thank Rahim Shayegan, a friend, let's say, college mate in Göttingen, when we both studied at the feet of Professor David Neil Mackenzie, one of the great ones in Middle Iranian studies, and the whole team of UCLA and of the Pure Dawood Center, who gave me this opportunity to talk about my project in Kurdish Iraq, in the Kurdish region of Iraq. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody.